Even though Donald Trump was acquitted in his second impeachment trial by 43 Senate Republicans, the legal exposure tailing the disgraced former president, as well as his family and associates, is creeping ever closer. For starters, the Manhattan District Attorney now finally has Trump's tax returns after the Supreme Court shut down Trump's final attempt to keep them hidden earlier this week. Investigators now have several million pages of Trump's financial records in their possession. And crucially, it is more than just his tax returns. As Andrew Weissman, who led the prosecution of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort, points out, quote, the value of the Mazars documents is not in the disclosure of tax returns. That is available to law enforcement from tax authorities. Accounting records enable a prosecutor to see how the reported tax numbers were calculated. The underlying data is key to proving criminal intent, as it was in the Manafort investigation. Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance is wasting no time getting to the bottom of those records, apparently. The New York Times reported earlier this week Vance has enlisted a prominent former federal prosecutor to help with the case, with deep experience investigating and defending white-collar and organized crime cases. That is far from the end of the Trump family's legal concerns. A court filing earlier this week revealed Donald Trump Jr. was deposed on February 11th as part of an investigation into alleged misuse of contributions for his father's 2017 inauguration. According to the filing by the D.C. Attorney General's office, Don Jr.'s testimony, quote, raised further questions about the nature of an invoice related to the inauguration and revealed evidence defendants have not yet produced to the district. Don Jr.'s sister, Ivanka, was deposed in the same case 2 months ago. And of course, there's Trump's former campaign manager turned podcast host, Steve Bannon, who Trump pardoned in his final hours in office after prosecutors alleged, and this is really key, Bannon's crowdfunding We Build the Wall campaign took hundreds of thousands of dollars donated and used them for personal expenses. Basically, they accused him of ripping off Trump people. Turns out Bannon might not be out of the woods yet either. There are new reports the Manhattan District Attorney's office, who just got Trump's financial records, has also subpoenaed financial records relating to Bannon's border wall funding scheme. After decades of shady dealings, 4 years of corruption at the highest levels, looks like Trump and a lot of these people are in serious danger of possibly finally coming face to face with consequences. I'm joined now by two experts of prosecuting fraud and public corruption, Danya Perry, former New York State Deputy Attorney General, and former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Ankush Khidori, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in financial fraud and who penned the case for prosecuting Trump in the New York Review of Books. Ankush, let me start with you and ask if you're right now sitting in Cy Vance's office, or you've been hired by Cy Vance, and you know the van pulls up to the loading dock in the Manhattan DA's office, and they take the boxes out. What's the plan? What are you doing?
That's an extremely complicated question. So, I mean, there are a bunch of different ways you could come at this. You know, I think as Andrew Weissman correctly pointed out, the work papers here are going to be really important in trying to retrace potentially where some important figures originated and how they progressed through the life cycle and onto reporting. But, you know, one thing that they can do is zero in on certain types of disclosures and reporting in areas where witnesses may have already told them to look, or where news reports have suggested that there may be some problems, for instance, surrounding consulting fees that are being paid to family members. And in other areas, you may just want to begin the long and laborious process of trying to line up these documents against analogous types of representations that were being made to lenders or potential insurers. So how you come at this kind of depends on what sorts of tools you have in your arsenal. I mean, if they have people who are, you know, former insiders or cooperators who are already helping them, that can be great. You're saying, so if they've pointed you to places where they're representing the value of something in one place as something, you know, high for, say, investors, and then when it's tax time, representing it is much lower, and they've already told you that, you can look for that and the corroboration and the worksheet around it in the documents. That's exactly right. But then, you know, that would only be really the start of your inquiry into that particular anomaly or discrepancy, because you would want to understand exactly how those figures were calculated, who all had hand in them, whether it's accountants, lawyers, auditors, you know, what you can glean from documents, emails, from witness interviews. You would want to speak to really anyone who had a hand in preparing the relevant figures and documents. And you would want to try to test and close off any possible benign interpretations of what may have happened, and including, aggressive accounting or aggressive interpretations of tax law that may not rise to the level of criminality.
That's exactly where I wanted to go next, Danya. So I'll go to you on this, right? I mean, my understanding is tax cases can be hard. Criminal tax cases can be hard to build, and the reason is that people can they can make mistakes, or they can engage in sort of aggressive use of the tax code that doesn't cross over into criminal. What is the line? What are you looking to establish if you are a criminal prosecutor in this case, Cy Vance?
You're right. It can be a fine line. And I think there's a tendency to oversimplify. There's looking from the outside in, you might think, well, let's just look. Now we've got the records, or the DA's office has the records. Let's look at the four corners of these records and let's see what they show. Do they show an inflation of certain assets for certain purposes, or deflation for certain purposes? But you're absolutely right, Chris, that you have to prove a prosecutor is going to have to show willful and intentional conduct that you're going to have to pin on individuals. And so you've got to look outside the four corners of the documents. As Ankush just pointed out, you've got to look at the work papers, you've got to look at the business records, and the best of all scenarios is you've got an insider who can actually walk you through it, because it can be incredibly complex and nuanced, and get you to intent. And that's really what it is here. It's criminal intent. And that is not so easy from a set of papers and documents. It's
right.
Just,
the documents, it's hard to make intent of the documents alone, is what you're saying.
Exactly right.
Ankush, there's also the question of the timeline here, which I find sort of fascinating. I mean, one of the things that Donald Trump has done very effectively throughout his life, and I think it's true of a lot of powerful people who pay lots of money to attorneys, is just drag stuff out. You just get longer and longer and longer. He did it, you stiff some piano tuner at the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, and it's like, yeah, maybe you can get paid in 8 years if you track him down. They've already, he managed to kick the can down the road long enough to get out of the White House. He lost. What kind of timeline can you imagine here with something like this, given how many records, how complex it might be?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a great question. And I think the best we can say is that an investigation of this kind of complexity into this sort of area can take years, plural. And that's under very good conditions. Now, I think the DA's office has been very impressively circumspect about kind of what sorts of things that they've done already, but it looks like the investigation is still in its relatively early stages, that they didn't do a lot of aggressive investigative work while Trump was still in office. But so it's not entirely possible from the outside looking in to sort of assess kind of where they are in kind of the life cycle of an investigation like this. But if it's early on, I mean, it could be a long time before any kind of decisions are made one way or the other. As Danya correctly pointed out, identifying culpable individuals with criminal intent and then trying to work yourself up the organization as high as possible, that can take a long, long time. And if this investigation really is in its relatively early stages, I would be surprised if anything of any great consequence happens anytime soon.
Danya, the last question for you is just about the broader context of this. Like, what you worked in an office that I'm sure had political conceptions, right? Running around the state attorney general. You do your job apolitically, but politics exists outside. Like, the thinking inside that office about this.
Yeah, look, I'm sure, to Ankush's point, this could take a while. And I think I'm certain that the DA's office is going to take the time that's necessary, but to also do it as quickly as possible while memories are fresh, while there's, interest. There's obviously a great amount of public scrutiny and public interest in this case. And so they're not going to let it get stale. They're throwing all the resources at it. They've got consulting and outside consulting company, and they brought in Mark Pomerantz, who is a very reputable and respected investigator and former prosecutor. And so they're looking to get this done. They obviously have been waiting for years now for these records, and they're going to get to it as quickly as they absolutely can.
The segment has served as an intro into why white-collar criminals get away with it and why white-collar criminal prosecutions are difficult and rare. with Danya Perry and Ankush Kidori. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Big news this week as America